You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 379 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. I'm recording this show in the hours before Special Counsel Robert Mueller testifies before the House about his report. And so I'm going to take the first part of today's show to go back over and hit some important highlights of the whole Russiagate conspiracy theory, why it's all a fake kind of a thing that's been used to hurt the U.S.-Russian relationship, explain away Hillary Clinton's embarrassing loss to Donald Trump, and generally constrain some of Donald Trump's less interventionist and warlike foreign policy ideas. So, I think it'll be a fun show. Take the time to share it or recommend it to somebody. You find the show online at the Libertarian Institute, where the show, along with my daily news roundup, is featured in the right-hand column of the homepage. If you listen to a few shows and you like it, make sure you subscribe to the show somewhere. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube. The show should be up everywhere people listen to podcasts. Subscribing to it, make sure you don't miss a single episode because I update current events on the show. The way you get the most out of it is by listening to every episode. Last up, today I am doing, that is July 24th, 2019, the monthly live stream for the patrons. So if you want to come on and join the hangout and talk with me, you gotta be a $5 donor a month to patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. If you want to ask questions, patrons get preference, but anybody who's a member of the Foreign Policy Focus Facebook group can go in there today and post a question. I'll answer it later on. I'll start the live stream about 9 p.m. Eastern time. All right, I'm starting off today's show by talking about Russiagate a little bit. Robert Mueller is about to go sit in front of the House and give some testimony about his investigation into Donald Trump and the alleged conspiracy that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election away from Hillary Clinton. Everybody who listens to this show know that's false, but with Mueller sitting down in front of the House, it's an opportunity for all of the DNC propagandists and everybody who's taken this never Trump Russiagate line to generate some more headlines about how, oh no, Donald Trump is actually guilty and should be impeached, and we've, shifted the goalpost and changed and distorted the story so much that, we're nowhere near the original conspiracy of him conspiring with Russia. But now this is, an obstruction charge that wasn't brought because of a Justice Department policy. And so, there's probably some of these House members that are looking for some ammunition to bring impeachment, and others just looking to make some headlines and to get, a few 100,000 views on some YouTube clips. Now, I guess I will say, and just to clarify, that if anybody wants to impeach Donald Trump for war crimes committed in Yemen and for violating the Constitution by waging unconstitutional wars and doing all other kinds of invasions of Americans' privacy and restricting and constraining the rights of Americans, then please, go impeach Donald Trump. Let's debate the Yemen war out there. Let's talk about that. But, this whole fake Russiagate thing has really been disastrous. The reason that I've spent so much time on this show talking about it, because, it does seem like something of a domestic issue, and I really don't like Donald Trump and, have accused him of being a war criminal since about his second day in office. So I don't particularly have any interest in defending the guy. I do have a little bit of an interest in defending the truth, and so that is definitely part of why I bring it up. But I do think it's a particular interest to this show because of the way the Russiagate conspiracy theory has been used. One thing it's done is it's really damaged any chance that Donald Trump had to make nice with Vladimir Putin and reset relations with Russia. As much as, Donald Trump could have done it despite all of this negative media attention he got, the fact that it was all there, I'm sure hemmed him in an awful lot on this issue. If you'll remember, there were stories written at CNN, not The Onion, CNN, because Vladimir Putin gave Trump an official, 2018 FIFA World Cup ball that had a little Bluetooth thing in it. That way you could sync to the ball to do something with it. It was in every FIFA ball. Putin gave one to Donald Trump, and maybe it was bug or he was spied on. all this ridiculous stuff that has tainted and made it harder for Donald Trump to move closer to Vladimir Putin has been really problematic. If you also look at it, the whole Russiagate investigation has had the effect of hemming in Donald Trump's foreign policy. And I believe there were even people within, kind of the quote unquote deep state who made this statement, basically saying that we were afraid that Donald Trump was going to act too far out of the establishment acceptable foreign policy of endless wars and intervention and increased military spending. He said crazy things about getting out of NATO. And I only say that's crazy is because I don't think Donald Trump ever had any intention of leaving NATO. I mean, for all I care, we could get out of it, but I never actually had a whole lot of faith that was going to be something Donald Trump would follow through on. But other things like maybe withdrawing from Syria, drawing down, or if not, ending the war in Afghanistan, getting along better with Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, those were all things that I thought, well, maybe Donald Trump and his policy would get on board with. But I really think they have used this Russiagate narrative to smear the president and make it very hard for him to get any of that done. Now, maybe in the world where Russiagate never happens, they use some other scandal of Donald Trump, maybe one of his personal vices. I think women's a pretty popular one with that guy. Some stupid, racist kind of thing he said or tweeted they used to, they have all kinds of ways to, leverage political pressure on the guy. But they really use this Russiagate thing, and, it's really been problematic. At the hearing today, I would expect to hear a lot of questions from Democrats trying to get Mueller to say a couple of things. One is that he would have recommended charges or indicted Donald Trump for obstruction if it wasn't for this Justice Department policy not to indict a sitting president. And they're going to look for other ammunition to use to impeach Donald Trump. I think quite a few of the Democrats attending the hearing today actually want that. Not that I think there's enough Democrats in the party willing to fight that political battle to do it, especially now over this obstruction and Russiagate thing. There may be some issues here, as Andrew McCarthy points out at The Hill, and I'll link to this article in the show notes page. On Monday, the Department of Justice and Attorney General Bob Barr gave Mueller some instructions on, what to do during his testimony. And there's also been a federal judge who has kind of restricted some of the things that Mueller could say. I believe Bob Barr told Mueller to stick to the, what he wrote in the report. And so I guess this would be a way not to talk about what Mueller would have done differently as far as charging goes and all these different kind of special circumstances. And if this little thing was a little bit different, what would he have been able to do then? And I think most of that will center around the obstruction. I guess he's also going to be hemmed in quite a bit by what that federal judge said in the Concord management trial. I talked about that on a couple episodes back on the show. I'll go ahead and link to that episode in the show notes page. But basically, the Mueller report didn't line up with the indictment of the Internet Research Agency. This is the company that made the Facebook and Twitter ads and, different memes that people, very falsely allege changed the results of the 2016 election. And so Mueller's not going to be able to talk about that part of it either. Now, along with Barr's instructions seeming to kind of constrain what Mueller's going to be able to say that the Democrats would like to hear, McCarthy also believes it's going to constrain what he's going to be able to say that the Republicans will like to hear, especially looking into any mispractice or malfeasance at the FBI regarding the investigation into both Trump's campaign and Trump's presidency. If you look at, I think it's the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, largely being based off of, the fake Steele dossier, and opposition research that the DNC generated and paid for. And remember, we're talking about outside influence here. And so Christopher Steele, who was paid for by the DNC, was a MI5, a British spy who, compiled a bunch of evidence from Eastern Europe and Russia about all the bad things that Trump did. And most of this was just fake and made up, and was later turned out either couldn't be substantiated or proven false. That was the main source of evidence for some FISA warrants. And so that would be some real malpractice to, use an opposition research from a foreign intelligence officer to get a FISA warrant on an American involved in a presidential campaign of a, leading top presidential party. And apparently that also wasn't disclosed to, the judge at the time that this was opposition research. the other investigation I think the FBI was looking at into Trump because of statements that he made in public, saying that they weren't in the interest of America. And this would have been ones, that this investigation would have been really looking into, I think, restraining Trump's foreign policy. And so the first time I read the McCarthy article, I thought, that's kind of weird that, Barr would do anything to restrict what Mueller could say about those things. But it's pointed out that there is a report going on by an IG Horowitz that's moving through, and Republicans will have their day to ask those important questions about, FBI overstep and malpractice. One question I do hope a Republican, I'm assuming only a Republican, will ask Mueller is about the timeline in the report. I think this is probably the thing that makes the most sense if you're just explaining it to somebody who, unlike myself, has spent dozens, if not over 100 hours researching and watching video and listening to podcasts and interviews of all these different analysts and players in Russiagate to really make them not believe the Mueller report. And it says that a couple days before WikiLeaks had any contacts between alleged Russian Twitter accounts that, according to the Mueller report, allegedly somehow transferred the emails to WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks had already said that they have Hillary Clinton emails and they're getting ready to release them. And so if Julian Assange had gotten the emails from DNC leaks or Guccifer, then Mueller really has to explain how that happened when WikiLeaks wasn't contacted by either of these people until after WikiLeaks has already announced that they had the emails. And also, by the time WikiLeaks, I believe, got any documents from either of these groups, it was either within days or after they had already started releasing the Clinton emails. And, if anybody knows WikiLeaks at all, they're a very thorough and careful organization who really goes through and checks the authenticity of documents. So it doesn't make sense that they would have been able to turn around thousands of emails within 2 days and verify that they're all fact. All right, my guess is that if anything interesting does happen, it's going to be a topic on a future show. So I would expect Friday, Monday, you'll be hearing more about Russiagate. On to some other news. I read an article in Defense One. I'll link to this one in the show notes page because I think it's pretty important. Of Donald Trump apparently getting closer with the CEO of Lockheed Martin, named Marilyn Hewen. And in the past, Trump has called her Marilyn Lockheed and been somewhat critical, I think, of both her and Lockheed Martin. And so Trump moving closer to Lockheed, I obviously think is terrible and terrifying. So something we need to keep our eyes on. Also, seeing what new Pentagon contracts are offered in the next couple of days. One of those meetings that Trump had with Maryland was in, I believe, the cab of a THAAD missile interceptor. And these are the, I think, high altitude, so like the ICBM missile interceptors that are now being sold to Saudi Arabia. And so it's interesting that if, Lockheed's making big sales to Saudi Arabia, suddenly Trump is getting closer to Lockheed Martin. In the past on the show, I've talked about Google's Project Maven. This was a contract from the Pentagon to develop AI drone software, I think to help identify and target different people for drone strikes. After some backlash at Google, they announced they would not renew this contract. However, what Google has been doing is investing in companies that are working on these kind of softwares. And there's an article by Lee Fang at The Intercept that's linked at the show notes page on this. Alexa O'Brien has a piece at Defense One. Again, this one's linked in the show notes page. Full show notes page today. And part of that is just because I think there's a lot of these articles that have good details and things that everybody should read. But this is on why civilian casualties weren't more heavily reported during the ISIS war. And so it's a really interesting topic, and being at Defense One is an interesting outlet for it. You maybe think to see this kind of thing at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or a site like antiwar.com, but she's, writing with Defense One here. I guess, was either commissioned to do this or taught to Air Wars about doing this. Air Wars, of course, is the NGO that went and really has done amazing work tracking and verifying civilian casualties in Iraq and Syria since the, really the start of the war against ISIS there. And she finds a couple of things. I guess one is the way the current structure of newsrooms are set up is there's really no one to ask for these kind of stories. I have never worked in a newsroom, so I really don't feel able to weigh in on this, but I'm hoping to ask Will Porter this question, who has worked in something of a newsroom and is a journalist, by training and college education, about how the structure of a newsroom could be preventing these kind of stories from being published. She identifies that there's really no incentive or push from the editors to the writers to write stories about this. And so anytime a story does get written, it's on the ambition of a journalist. She points out that these are air wars being fought. And so there's not a whole lot of journalists embedded with the troops. And not that this necessarily produces the best kind of journalism, but it makes it very difficult, I think, to have any journalism at all in the kind of counterinsurgency, terrorist-style air war that was being fought in a lot of these cities. There was just no journalists anywhere really to ask people a whole lot of questions. And that's not a complete excuse, because obviously Patrick Coburn was hanging around Iraq and Syria asking all these questions to different kind of refugees, like, hey, where'd you come from? Where were you going? What were things like there? Who was killing who was committing war crimes? He got cell phones to people in places like Mosul and I believe even Raqqa, and had, conversations with these people about what life was like, in these cities at the time. So that kind of reporting was absolutely possible. Although, as she points out, and something I said and agree with, that I think the air war makes it a little bit more difficult to happen. One interesting thing she points out in that article that I think is wise to note as, somebody in communicating the anti-war message is that the human interest stories resonate a little bit more than the individual casualty reports. And so, when I talk about Yemen, I say that, 2 million people are starving to death now. They say famine-like conditions for 250,000. And that, to me, sounds like, oh my God, we have to do something instantly. You have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are going to starve to death in a man-made created famine for absolutely no reason at all, in an unwinnable war. But what more resonates with people is sitting down, with some kid who's starving to death, I guess, putting a camera in front of them and saying, how does this make you feel? What's life like for you? Things like that. I guess that's, a disadvantage that the people of Yemen really have, is there haven't been a whole lot of Western reporters in that country. A couple of them that have made it, like Jane Ferguson of PBS NewsHour, had to smuggle herself across the battle lines there to get to Sana'a to do some reporting. There's an article on fairness and accuracy in reporting that I'll link to in the show notes page about the Venezuelan opposition and Juan Guaido. The article talks about and does a good job of, analyzing the mainstream reporting on Guaido and talking about how, when at the beginning of the year he was declaring power and it was a whole part of this big U.S. regime change push to put him in power and remove Maduro, they were talking about Guaido as the elected president in some cases, which wasn't even true, or the rightful leader of Venezuela, when really he was just some guy who went out in the town square and proclaimed himself to be president by some constitutional provision that really didn't apply in that case. And now the reporting on Guaido is much more reflective of the truth. I'm guessing that part of this is that he's been exposed as a fraud, in the sense that a lot of his advisors, I guess, are guilty of corruption. Although the Trump administration is going to throw some more money at them anyways. It's shown that he really isn't a leader of the entire opposition. The opposition itself is pretty fractured. And even at Guaido's proclamation that he was the interim president, some of the opposition leadership walked off the stage when he did it. So he really wasn't a united leader of the Venezuelan opposition against Maduro. And this is one of the problems the opposition has, is that there's really no united front, to oppose the popular support that Maduro has. Trump says that he's having some positive correspondence with North Korea. This is a good sign. No talks, again, another summit or anything like that scheduled yet. But if there are positive correspondence going on and they're trying to work out the details of some kind of agreement that could be signed at by Trump and Kim at the next summit, this may take some time. The U.S. is cracking down on China. A U.S. court, I believe in New Jersey, indicted a Chinese company and 4 executives of that company for violating U.S. sanctions against North Korea. the U.S. also sanctioned a Chinese energy company for violating U.S. sanctions against Iran. Israeli soldiers swooped into a Palestinian village outside of Jerusalem yesterday. And outside Jerusalem may be too generous to the Israeli narrative. Maybe it was on the outskirts of Jerusalem. The name is Sur Bashir, and the people of that village, many of them had their homes destroyed. This is a very good example of how the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian works. And in fact, in the intro to the show, I have this clip from the show Homeland, which I know isn't always great in kind of the foreign policy and the view of the world that they, kind of proclaim in their show. But there is this scene where one of the main characters is talking to his sister, and she's an Israeli settler, and kind of how her mind has been poisoned. And he's saying to her, that you have this group of people who you're forcing to live under laws that they didn't make for themselves, and you bulldoze their homes when you want. What do you expect them to look at you as, and how do you expect that relationship to be? And, here's just another example of it. You have clips here of Israeli soldiers watching, one of these buildings be demolished and laughing about it. And, for the people who that is their home, and the millions of Palestinians who live in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and elsewhere in the world as refugees, look at that and feel the pain of those Palestinians who watch their home be destroyed because they know that either can be them very soon or it has been them and their family. Trump met with Pakistani President Imran Khan, or he may be a prime minister actually. Trump made some interesting statements at this and around this that caught some headlines about being able to destroy and kill 10 million Afghanis within 10 days. And this caused a lot of freak out and panic. I'm not quite sure why. The U.S. has been bombing Afghanistan for 18 years now. While I guess we haven't killed quite 10 million people in that country, we have shown that we really don't care about the lives of the Afghanis. But, in some ways I was like, Donald Trump is giving to people a realistic portrayal of American military power, that if we wanted to, we could go and bomb that country into absolute dust. I don't know about flatten the mountains, but we could make a real run at it. And so while I don't like the way Donald Trump says that, there is something, as Dave Smith always points out, the great host of the Part of the Problem podcast, there's something very revealing about Donald Trump. And I think this is, helps to reveal kind of the slaughter that the U.S. military would be capable of posing on Afghanistan, and how ridiculous it is that we have a country where we could kill every single person within a couple of days, and yet we've been there for 18 years and we're still at war. I think the real and more important news that happened at that press conference, though, was, Donald Trump saying that he was putting pressure on Khan to pressure the Taliban, which I guess is close to portions of the Pakistani government, although I don't know if it's really close to the civilian portion that Khan would have more control over. But Khan said that he would put pressure on the Taliban to meet with the Afghan government. Seems like talks with the Taliban are still going well. Hopefully, the Pakistanis pushing the Taliban to take talks with the Afghan government doesn't cool things off. It does seem to me maybe that if they're getting close to a peace deal with the Americans, they probably should talk to the Afghan government. That way, if the U.S., leaves, things don't have to turn back into a civil war. I got some stories I want to roll through on Africa real quick. It's been a couple weeks since I've talked about some of the wars going on there. In recent weeks, the World Health Organization increased its threat level in the Congo Ebola outbreak from like a regional thing to an international one, because an Ebola victim traveled to a crowded market in Uganda before going back home to the Congo and dying. I think this has some impacts on the Congo government and then who was in charge of managing the Ebola outbreak in the Congo. The health minister lost some of their power. The reason that this is important is because the health minister is now resigned. It's all to do with vaccines. There's a vaccine from Merrick that I guess had been regularly given to people, but it had run out. And there's this new vaccine from Johnson & Johnson, and I'm not sure if an American citizen could possibly get it. Maybe still in, too early of a clinical phase or whatever, but the health minister had refused to allow it to be used in their country. The new powers and the way the politics in the Democratic or the Republican have changed, that vaccine is now going to be given. The health minister warns that the vaccine is untested and that it's going to create confusion and more hostilities in a region where the people who are at risk for Ebola are battling against, kind of health officials out of fear that they're being either manipulated or in some way scammed. I honestly have no idea how well the Johnson & Johnson vaccine works compared to the Merrick one, if there's any additional side effects or anything like that. Just let's hope that somehow this gets under control. One thing not making it easier is not only the distrust between the people and the health officials, but also that there's Islamist militants operating in the area. They just killed another 12 people. The UK said that they're going to deploy 250 troops to Mali next year. That country is in the middle of a civil war with jihadists backing one side. The French have come in and tried to bat the government. I guess that's not working extremely well since, the UK is now looking at getting involved. Although that story did say it won't be till next year, so I have some skepticism if it will ever happen. In South Africa, the government deployed some soldiers to Cape Town to help carry out raids. Apparently the murder rate or the number of murders in the Cape Town area so far in 2019 is over 2,000, which just seemed enormous to me. In Libya, the battle for Tripoli continues to go on. There's drone strikes being carried out apparently on both sides, as now Haftar's forces have been killed by some drone strikes. There was also one of Haftar's warplanes that was forced to land on some kind of highway in Tunisia. The pilot and the plane were taken. I am keeping my eye on this story because I think it'll be a little bit of an indication into if Haftar is gaining more international support if he gets this pilot and plane back. I think both the fighter pilots and the planes are probably a pretty limited and valuable resource for Haftar, and it would be something that he would really want to get back. And if it's true that more of these, kind of international community of countries like the United States and European countries and significant players in the region, Egypt, Saudi, UAE, all really want Haftar to just win this war and to take over Libya, then we may see that plane and pilot returned. Last on my list is South Sudan, where there's a peace agreement in place, but apparently there's not enough funding and people in place to implement all the conditions in the peace agreement, and now rebels say they have killed 8 soldiers. Hopefully this doesn't lead to, a bigger kickoff of violence, but those two stories together did give me some concern. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org. The show is also on checkpointasia.net. That site is run by my good friend Marko Marjanovic, past guest of the show. Find good foreign policy content there. Remember, tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern, is the Patreon live stream. So if you listen to the show Wednesday the 24th and you got time, check that out tonight. I hope everybody's enjoying it. I'll see you on Friday.